Professor Joe Cain, who's Professor of History and Philosophy of Biology at UCL, and he's going to talk about why invest in eugenics, the case of the University of London. Please welcome Professor Joe Cain.
We already know the story I'm going to tell you. What we don't know so well is why. To the question why, there's an easy answer and a complicated one. The easy answer is incomplete. Worse, it's just inadequate. The complicated answer is scary. It raises fundamental questions, and it's something easy to hide away and to forget about. In case you knew the story, but can't quite recall its detail this morning, just after 10 o'clock, when it really matters that you know it, let me cover some of the basics. When he retired in 1933, Carl Pearson had been the Francis Galton Professor for National Eugenics at University College for just over 20 years. He also had been director of the university's Eugenics Lab and Biometric Lab for a bit longer still. Pearson's story at University College began in the 1890s when he was appointed first as Professor of Applied Mathematics and Mechanics. At the turn of the century, he gained control of a sizable gift to the university from the worshipful company of drapers. This largely went into developing what later was called the Biometric Lab. That was the setting in which Francis Galton, Raphael Weldon, and Pearson developed key ideas in biometry, fought with those who rejected the value of those ideas, and together imagined how they could change the world through the pages of their new journal, Biometrica. Pearson was the one firmly planted at University College across the whole of this period. The other two had much more complex phases of presence and absence. So in 1904, Francis Galton asked Pearson and others to help him solve a problem. Acknowledging he was running out of steam at the age of 82, Galton now wanted staff to keep some computational and big data projects going. But he had nowhere to put them and no one to watch over them whilst he was otherwise engaged. Long story short, he found a willing partner in Sir Arthur Rooker, then the principal at the University of London. Galton proposed a simple, really small plan. One postdoc, one assistant, with some clerical support maybe, all needing just a few rooms pretty much anywhere. Galton offered to pay all the costs for 3 years, renewable by mutual agreement. In a really quick decision process, Pearson vouched for the project's intellectual merits, the principal vouched for Galton, and it was agreed. So, early in 1905, so you know this story, early in 1905, the Eugenics Record Office came to be about one street down the road from the university's central quad. This picture was taken after World War II, and some buildings are missing, but you can see the general topography. What became the Eugenics Record Office was in 88 Gower Street, about a street down from the main quad at University College. In setting up the records office, one of Weldon's students was hired as the postdoc. One of Pearson's staff was reassigned to be the assistant. Work for Galton got underway quickly. Well, let's place the inner workings of that office to one side this morning. One key point, though. This is not a collaboration between Pearson and Galton. Pearson kept himself at arm's length. Yes, he was friendly. Yes, he was happy to talk about the work. But he thought he had enough to do with his own projects. Besides, and save this thought, there were some awkward elements in Galton's proposal, and these were best kept off Pearson's patch. Right, jump ahead another 18 months to October 1906. Something goes wrong with the office. Galton's postdoc resigns with immediate effect. Working for Galton, he said, proved just too frustrating. And so he was off for greener pastures. No discussion, he was out. This was a very low point for Galton. Weldon had died unexpectedly in the spring that year, and that shock was still reverberating strongly. Galton also was quite ill himself. He was trying to campaign and set up more campaigning projects, and he was not going to be dragged into a simple problem of staffing. Turning to Pearson, he cried, "Help!" Pearson replied, "No." It took a few months, but eventually Pearson changed his mind. This happened because Pearson found a way to morph Galton's project into his own, something to give him a boost in the short term and something that just might turn into the deal of a lifetime a little bit later. Late in 1906, Pearson proposed to the university the Francis Galton Laboratory for National Eugenics. He would direct it. It would have staff paid for by Galton. It would undertake basic research into problems of eugenics. It would offer short courses in professional development. It would work side by side with the other project Pearson was developing too, that biometric lab, now labeled as a sister project. Pearson's proposal had Galton's immediate and unqualified support. Phew, problem solved. It was presented as an easy deal, really just a trivial decision for the principal to accept. Really, it was just a reconstitution, they said, of what was already going on. Pearson simply would add this to his existing workload. New costs were trivial. Major benefits danced on the horizon. Galton was over the moon. Problem solved. Pearson was a trusted pair of hands and an ambitious builder. Privately to the principal, Galton also intimated the prospects of a legacy. If things worked out, he told Richter, I'm inclined to change my will. So, early in 1907, this proposal sped its way through university governance, rubber stamps at the ready. And the conversion got underway for the start of the next academic session. Pearson was now in charge. From that point forward, Pearson got busy, very busy. I'll come back to that shortly, but let's complete this basic narrative. Fast forward to 1911. 1911, early in that year, Galton died. He was true to his word, and he left a legacy to the University of London for the eugenics lab, and specifically for Pearson. It had to be presented in non-specific terms, but everybody understood this choreography. Galton's donation would be used to endow a professorship that for Pearson specifically, so that he could develop eugenics as a research subject with additional funds for staff and publications and work in the lab. Pearson vacated his existing professorship, meaning the university got back that budget line, and he took up the new title at the start of the new session. The Francis Galton Professor for National Eugenics was thus placed in charge of the Francis Galton Laboratory for National Eugenics, plus the Biometrics Lab. These two units were collected into a new academic department called Applied Statistics, with Pearson also serving as that head. So that's three roles brought together into one person. With a lot of external money here facilitating work, and about 8 to 10 people on staff to do it. Now citing Galton as the founder, there immediately followed a coordinated press campaign to raise funds for a new building, and to enlarge the endowment. So on the timeline, we have 1904, 1906 and 7, 1911, and then there's 1933. That's the year Pearson retired. His Department of Applied Statistics was split into two. Carl's son, Egon, was promoted and named head of the new Department of Statistics. Ronald Fisher was awarded the Galton Chair and named head of a new Department of Eugenics. Fisher's remit included the Eugenics Lab and its staff, as well as the collection of Galtoniana that Pearson left behind. Fisher kept his post for a decade, leaving in 1943. Okay, I'm still standing between you and books and you and coffee. So let's get on with this. Right, we have a narrative. Now some analysis. I'll get into that with a tangent, quick tangent. I wish I had a pound for every time I heard something like this. The first International Eugenics Congress was held in 1912, hosted by the University of London, with over 400 delegates from across Britain, Europe, and North America. This hosting proves the University of London was a keen sponsor of eugenics. Now, this link between hosting and championing, I think, is sloppy logic. It's simply guilt by association. What's the university got to do with this? By the same logic, what do we make of this fact of slightly larger size? University of London hosted the first Universal Races Congress in 1911, over 4 days with 58 speakers and 2,100 attendees, including representatives from 50 countries and 20 governments. The goal was to attack concepts of racial purity, racialized national identities, hierarchy, and subordination. These two sit in weird juxtaposition. I've never seen anyone draw the conclusion that University of London was anti-racist based on the fact that it hosted the second conference in 1911. I wouldn't believe it if they tried. Now, sloppy thinking like this is little more than dog whistling to partisans already primed for a fight. It tells us nothing about the period, nothing about the University of London, and nothing about the relational calculus in which eugenic advocates operated. I want to circle back around to the core question in this association of institution and ideology. Why did University of London agree to host eugenics? Well, strangely, and here's the twist, I don't think it was to develop eugenics. Okay, let's change the frame of reference. Let's talk about Galton and Pearson without reference to the content of eugenics, without reference to that ideology we all know is repugnant and vicious. What's going on in 1904, 1906 and 7, 1911, 1933, such that eugenics is brought in, eugenics is kept, and eugenics is developed? Well, 1904 is easy, I think, to explain. That's Galton's approach to the principal of the University of London, Arthur Rooker. You don't need ideological co-conspiracy to think this was an easy decision. A couple of staff, a couple of years, a couple of rooms, all paid for, vouched by a prominent academic, work that seems little more than bland data collection and census taking. Seems a very easy decision for an executive to make, especially when it's coming from someone so prominent in the London scene. Maybe even it's just a favor. Rooker did submit this request to due process, it must be said, and a steering committee was set up to monitor the project. Yes, that steering committee was a very soft touch and is no way adversarial. But that committee genuinely advised on the overall plan. It feels to me like a simple ad hoc special project, not some kind of new institutional agenda. 1906 and 7 takes us a little deeper. That's the collapse of the Eugenics Record Office and the reformulation under Pearson of the Galton Laboratory for National Eugenics. Here, we catch Pearson in a lie. Trained as a solicitor and exact to the point of razor-sharp precision when it suited him, Pearson's proposal to the university at this point recasts Galton's old project as really just the eugenics lab all along. That label record office is nowhere to be found in this proposal, and the new title already is described with a past tense. It was already there. And now Pearson presents, really the only decision he presents to the principal is whether to move this project from the principal's domain into an academic department. A trivial administrative shift in ownership, Pearson claims, and I'm happy to take on the work. Never mind, Pearson had privately laid out a lot of criticisms of Galton's record office. Never mind, there were some activities he wanted to cancel immediately. Never mind, Pearson had plans for deploying the team he was going to get into several projects he already had underway. Never mind, he had in mind using this opportunity to open new fronts in a long, long battle with critics and obstructionists. Pearson's lie made the principal's decision seem trivial, while it obscured other plans. Two other factors, I think, are crucial right at this moment. For Pearson, an endowed chair meant a great deal. He was shockingly overworked for 1906, with never-ending streams of students and exam scripts in applied mathematics and in applied astronomy. He was pushing hard in applied statistics too, plus journal editing, plus publishing book materials, plus many hours of tuition, plus all that time he took to fight with people in the Royal Society. An endowed chair promised him sweet relief. Well, that's Pearson. What about the principal? Why did he say yes? For the principal, an endowed chair offered a way to increase staff and capacity without increasing costs, of course. Tempting. But there's something else here more than money for the principal. Our principal, let's go this way. Our principal had ambitions, large ones. Galton's patronage in 1906 and 7 gave him some much-needed reputational capital. In the mid-noughts, University of London, if you don't know, the University of London was undergoing huge structural change, moving towards a federated system of the London colleges. That change was controversial, as also was hugely ambitious. When Rooker wrote to thank Galton in January 1907, thank him for providing the funds and the idea, at that precise moment that Pearson's intervention was in play to take over the lab, Rooker signaled an important theme. He said to Galton, "I must write a private line thanking you most sincerely for that generous gift of £1,000 and the still more generous schemes you're developing." Well, so far, some money for us. But he went on, Rooker went on. Rooker celebrated the fact that Galton had selected the University of London for his gift. It's an external sign of approval, he said, which lightens Rooker's own task of building the institution's reputation. 5 years ago, Rooker commented, the university's income was £29,000. This year, it was 3 times that, £95,000. Next year, more still, £120,000. But we don't only want public bodies to help us, Rooker said. We want distinguished individuals to recognize the existence of the university too. You are one of the few who have done this, Rooker told Galton. So Rooker said yes, in part, I think, because Galton's patronage could be used as a vote of confidence in Rooker himself. Well, once the eugenics lab became a part of the academic department, questions about change and termination fall into a complex institutional bureaucracy that many of us live in every single day. Just a few salient points about that. Pearson was a superb administrator. Reports filed, always with the eye on growing prestige. He kept to budget. He created new income. He looked after his staff even when he disputed with them. He took ownership of the subjects his chair occupied. He added value to the university, such as when he stocked 2 new observatories built in the college's main quad from resources that he had assembled himself. Second, Pearson was impressively productive, with his group publishing upwards of 20% of the whole total output of the faculty in some years. Third, Pearson was collaborative, at least from the executive's perspective. Through the lab came professionals in health and medicine, education, social work, anthropology, demography, and more. University College saw tremendous growth in that decade, especially across the sciences and medicine, and Pearson was contributing strongly to it. Cancel the program. It ain't broke. No need to fix it. And don't forget, the Noughts were a period of really strong protesting around some issues in science and society. Here's the protests around the brown dog statue that specifically enrolled University College at exactly the same time. In that decade, anti-vivisection and votes for women were at the top of the political agenda in terms of what universities did in the wider society. Anti-eugenic voices, there were plenty. Anti-eugenic voices were easy to ignore up on Gower Street. Fourth, and most important, Pearson was adamant that he was building a new scientific discipline with his approach to eugenics. That framing mattered crucially for him, and it motivated him to create huge demarcation and boundary work projects for him and his colleagues. Pearson had no time for the predecessor of this society, for the Eugenics Education Society, because they were to him ill-disciplined ideologues with simplistic understandings of facts. They weren't scientists. Pearson contrasted research and propaganda. He heavily controlled his own staff when they engaged in teaching and speaking in public, lest they crossed that line between research and propaganda. This demarcation was crucial in Pearson's redesign of Galton's project in that 1906-1907 moment. It was baked into his rationale for why eugenics deserved to be a credible part of the university, why Galton merited celebration as founder, and why this needed to have biometry and statistics at its heart. So between 1907 and 1911, Pearson was trying to discipline eugenics, and that's why he refused to allow staff to attend the first International Eugenics Conference in 1912, held just a stone's throw from here at a hotel along the Thames. And it's why he was silent on major legislative reviews and commissions in the pre-war period. Until the science was clear, he said, he wanted to keep out of the fray. Pearson stayed in his lane, more or less. And in the period 1907 to 1911, this is crucial. He wanted more data, more research, more analysis, more sober reflection, low risk to reputation. And it's hard to see what mechanism executives at the university might have used in order to reach into Pearson's department and bring this project to an end. Claims for a new scientific discipline were common in the noughts, with lots of speculation and lots of risk-taking to create new fields. In that context, Pearson's claim, they just seem part of that general blooming, part of a garden of new opportunities. The only risk, it seemed, was if the money ran out. So Pearson was incredibly productive in this period, 1906 to 1910, 1911. Here's a table of looking at what the eugenics lab was producing over this period. You've got dates in one column, the total accumulation of papers they produced, and then in any interval, 5-year interval, how much they produced. Just that lab itself, none of the other kinds of enterprises Pearson was up to. He was incredibly productive in this period. I've written about this elsewhere. Pearson managed this high rate with a lot of collaboration, also with a lot of self-publishing and a lot of double counting, so be careful. I mean, I think his sprinting pace had something to do with a recurring need to convince Galton that investment in the eugenics lab was a sound and lasting investment in Galton's own legacy. I think Galton saw Pearson as a worthy heir, but I also think Galton was worried about his own celebrity and his own lasting legacy. And he did have options, like the Eugenics Education Society. They courted him aggressively to become a founder there too. There was considerable jostling for position between these two groups, Pearson and the society. Gushing over Galton in this period really goes quite over the top. Well, but we know who won, don't we? Lastly, consider 1933, almost there. Pearson's retirement. Ronald Fisher was hired. This one is, I think, trickier to understand. What was going on in the institution such that they pushed this forward? They could have stopped it, but they didn't. Why did the university keep eugenics and even expand it? I mean, this is when the university created that department of eugenics to house Fisher and the eugenics lab. It's a department now. And eugenics in Europe in 1933, as we all know, was very scary. I mean, it's hard to see why anyone would approve a proposal to highlight eugenics at this moment in time, unless they were sympathetic. Well, I think the answer to why the university did it lies with the endowed funds. That is, a line on the budget that says you can hire a professor and benefit from all that, and it's not going to cost you anything. Not only can you do it, but there's an imperative to do it, because if you don't, it'll look like you're unreliable to new benefactors and new ambitions. Unless the vocabulary for the, and likewise, the vocabulary for the appointment is fixed in the deed of gift. You can't change it. It's the Francis Galton Professor of Eugenics. Pearson served on the hiring panel, and he worried how to frame the new post to keep both biometry and eugenics going strong. For the sake of today, let's leave that maneuvering alone. Everyone on the panel agreed Fisher was the obvious choice, owing to his brilliance in mathematics and statistics. He also was well known in the popular eugenics community, a real friend of the Eugenics Society. Academics at the university didn't know what to do with Fisher. The statisticians didn't want him. Egon Pearson wanted nothing to do with his father's eugenics work. And Fisher was known to be a difficult colleague. The biologists didn't want him either. The head of that department, DMS Watson, he deplored eugenics. He also had priorities to grow the department towards lab work. And Fisher's mathematical skills, well, they just had no appeal. Also, in 1933, the biologists were hiring J.B.S. Haldane as professor of genetics. And in 1937, Haldane would slide into a new Weldon professorship of biometry. So the overlap is strong. Haldane clearly was an anti-eugenics, and this was just going to be trouble. So neither fish nor fowl, Fisher's appointment fell into the middle. A department of his own seems an administrative compromise and not much else. Now, some might agree with me here, but I think University College, in those years, that they created a period of relative stagnation for Fisher. I mean, he was brought in to grow eugenics, and if that's so, he failed. If the institution wanted to promote eugenics, it failed too, because what happened wasn't very much. Both productivity and ambition in the eugenics lab declined sharply after Fisher arrived and well before the start of the war. Fisher moved on to other projects too, and he outsourced the championing of eugenics to the Eugenics Society. Getting there. Okay, gosh, so much information so early in the morning with free books and coffee just on the horizon. Let's summarize this quickly. 1904, I think helping the explanation is networking of Galton to get something that he wants, an easy decision. 1906-07, it's more complicated, but most importantly, we have that lie. We have no new costs, and we have the addition of reputational capital for the principal. 1906, between 06 and 11, we have investment that looks to be an emerging scientific discipline, and it contributes to an ambitious growth plan at the university. This is propped up by phenomenal productivity, efficient management, and what looks like a really good corporate citizen in Pearson. 1911, there's a donor legacy that solves staffing problems and adds to reputational capital. 1933, there's that endowment. Engaging the endowment seems to be an imperative, but it also restricts decision-making. Constraints lead to compromise. Okay, what's the point of all this abstraction? 3 minutes. In this paper, I've pushed forward the claim that oddly, we don't need eugenics to understand the institutional side in the history of eugenics at University College. Could we tell pretty much the same story with other subjects and other people too, I wonder? Yes. Just so there's no ambiguity here today, we know for sure these workers were promoting eugenics. We know these workers promoted racist, anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, anti-many other things in their agenda, together with a pro-nativist vision of entitlement. We know this. These views were alive in their work, they were alive in their publishing and advocacy, and I don't buy for a minute Pearson's convenient division between research and propaganda. Plus, we just can't ignore the bedrock of structural supremacy and privilege and discrimination. It's all there, no mistake. But what I want to explore, though, are other possibilities, because I'm not just worried about eugenics. I worry about a lot of other despicable practices, too, and they happen at universities. I want to know the routes these things use to get into universities. I want to know how they gain markers of legitimacy. I want to know how they embed in those establishment devices. These are times when there are times when the content of eugenics must be our focus, but there are other times too, and I think other lenses give us better insights into why. One example will suffice for today, really. Lionel Penrose, some of you know well, he was Fisher's successor as the Galton Professor of Eugenics. Penrose, he hated eugenics. He mocked it. He went to the Eugenics Society and he told them they were lunatics. But he could not get his job title changed, no matter how he tried. And it was solicitors who were consulted by the university who said, that's what's on the gift. If you want the money, you're stuck. That lasted until Penrose's retirement, when the university finally saw fit to appoint a new professor of human heredity, not eugenics. The morals of Penrose's story, of course, are two. Sometimes actors are constrained by the administration, and if you just go by the job titles, you risk making a big mistake. Right, nearly there. 3 more minutes. So, what's the big discussion question for me this morning? Let's give this one a try as we go into coffee. Pearson was a savvy institutional operator, as well as a savvy academic entrepreneur. How do we promote people with these skills so that we do good without also opening the door for those who do bad? How do we manage something so complex as a modern research university so that we can call out the dodgy work without suffocating good innovation and discovery that will make for a better world? Of course, this includes working to call out the biases of privilege, self-centeredness, and grandiosity, preference and power. It also demands we go much farther. We know our universities today are powerful R&D labs for industry and the knowledge economy. It's easy to find examples of possible dodgy ambitions, questions over vetting, projects with dual uses we'd really rather not discuss. How do we police the voraciously hungry faculties of our research universities so that the ethics of content matter more than the rewards promised by savvy institutional operators? When I think about the history of eugenics at a place like UCL, after the pain and the shock and the alienation is processed, I want us to get down to that transcending question. How do universities say yes when they should be saying no? And what can we ourselves do to help ensure that our universities land on the better side of that answer? Well, that's it. Thanks very much.